Which Souls game has the best music? That is the question we will be answering today. But wait, how do you intend to do this? Well, great question, mate. Well, today we are going to rank every Soulsborne game on a tier list from S to F. Now, without further ado, let's get right into it. Starting with Dark Souls 1, upon release, revolutionized the gaming industry and gave birth to one of the biggest subgenres of games ever, Souls-like. To this day, Dark Souls 1 is still thriving and is beloved by a massive portion of the basement-dwelling gremlins that rampage Reddit. I feel it's important that we briefly speak about what makes the game so special, and that is a very broad question, because the answer, just like the game, is non-linear, like what I did there. But for this question, there is a very basic and oversimplified answer that to Souls veterans will infuriate them to the same degree as the frigid outskirts. And that is, of course, the games are difficult. But not only that, the combat is incredible. There is a cast of lovable characters and, of course, the bosses. But this video is not about that. If you want to hear me talk about the Dark Souls bosses, then feel free to check out my previous tier list where I do exactly that. That will be linked in the playlist at the end screen or in the description down below. But of course, stay to make sure that you see all of this video before going to watch that. This video is about the music, because honestly, the music in a Dark Souls game will make or break it. You can have the strongest, biggest, and best boss in gaming history, but if they were to whack the Benny Hill theme song from 1958 on top, suffice to say that would not have landed very well. But if you whack the dope-ass Vort of the Boreal Valley theme on top of it, you get a boss fight that is not only incredibly mechanically challenging and feels incredible, but also an intensely orgasmic experience, because holy fuck, just listen to that! But just before we get too deep into my rant, let's quickly explain how these games' music will be ranked. So the games are going to be ranked on a tier list from S to F, and these ranks will be given based on how well or poorly I think they score in a few criteria. These being, does the feeling of the music match and support the fight or area? Does the emotion of the music make sense for the point in the story? And of course, does the music enhance the fight? It's that simple. But just before we do get back into the video, I would just like to ask that you do consider subscribing, as I'm trying to hit 1K by the end of the year so I can beat the broken ass predictions made by Social Blade. So if you do enjoy this video, then please hit subscribe, and hey, you can always change your mind later. Anyways, without further ado, let's get back to the video. Dark Souls 1 is infamous for its music. Well, more, the lack thereof. There are only 4 occasions where the game actually has music, and that is in boss fights, when entering the Firelink Shrine, Ash Lake, and well, the main menu. That's it, and yet all of the tracks still manage to slap! Let's look at the most well-known example, and that is of course Gwyn, the Lord of Cinder. Gwyn's boss fight is an incredible balance between being slow and peaceful, supported by piano melodies that really enforce the tragic story of this once great warrior, who due to his desperate desire to prolong the Age of Fire, has lost his family, his power, and of course, his legacy. And then of course you got that really strange plot line that is the fact that he uses himself as pretty much what is a log to just reignite the flame. I'm just gonna ignore that. This is the best example of how music can elevate these fights to a legendary status. Music like Gwyn's can be found all throughout this game, but what happens when the music fades? It's depressing, isn't it? This is one of the strengths of DS1. The choice to have most areas void of music makes the times there are music feel more impactful, like the Firelink Shrine. The music for Firelink Shrine showed its purpose to the player without the player actually needing to be told it. You know that when you go from the areas that are void of music, which is for the most part all of the areas in the game, returning to the Firelink Shrine immediately makes you feel safe and calm. But besides telling the player what the importance of an area is, what is the removal of music good for? Well, to answer that question, we have to think about Blight Town, which is not a sentence I say very often because I fucking hate that place. All of the areas of Dark Souls 1 have deep and expansive lore, and the lack of music forces you, yes you, player, to think, why am I actually doing any of this? Why am I playing this game? The music makes you feel hopeless and even hollow. But then you get to the next boss and it's like, hey yo, that's a woman. Nah, what the fuck is that thing? Ew! That was such a dumb bit. So now it's time for the ranking, and let's pass it over to the judges. Thank you, Rose. Well, this contestant is a strong candidate for S tier, but of course, let's do the breakdown. Does the music enhance the fight? And of course, that is a 10 of 10, just like most of my videos. Does the music represent the narrative? It sure does. Another 10 of 10. And finally, okay, this bit is really dumb. It's going in S tier. Up next in this thinly veiled plan to just let myself ramble about how good this series' music actually is Dark Souls 2. Now, if you haven't been able to guess already, already. I am not a fan of this game at all. I have always felt that the game dropped the ball in so many aspects, and I feel it had a lot of missed potential. However, that does not apply to the music. Now, whoa, hang on a minute. Just before the DS2 mega critics pitchfork me to death in the streets of Athens, just hear me out, okay? Thank you. The music of DS2 is incredible for setting the scene and creating such a sense of importance in every moment it is prevalent. And now I feel that that is the only thing that I actually kind of learned from Dark Souls 1, and in the spirit of that, the hub location Majula is one of the only locations besides the boss fights where music can be found, and the track creates this sense of Majula being this magical place. There's almost something that makes it seem earthly, but my god, is it comforting. The track is slow and calm, which in comparison to the rest of music is a very welcome change. DS2 really hyper-focuses a lot on these depressing melodies that come into conflict with the raging, upbeat tracks in the boss fights. There isn't too much I can say about this game's music because it really is just indescribable. But there are quite a number of tracks that are just underwhelming, so the game is gonna go an A tier, although it's so close to being an S tier. But there were just too many tracks that fell quite flat and or were just blatantly repetitive. Not to say that the other games don't have tracks that are just obviously repetitive, because obviously they do, but in this game, I feel it's a lot more apparent to me, probably because I'm incredibly biased, but hey ho, moving on. Now it is time to talk about one of the games that has the best music in gaming history. Okay, I'm not biased, I swear, just because I made a video on it. It is time to talk about Dark Souls 3. Dark Souls 3 is absolutely incredible. The game, like those that came before it, has deep and expansive lore that completely changes the experience of playing the game when you understand it, because it is no longer about fighting this big dog that for some reason can freeze your nutsack off. It instead becomes a fight with a brave warrior who swore absolute loyalty to Pontiff Sullivan and who has come from a place that's covered in snow, so actually freezing your nutsack off kind of makes narrative sense. Bonus points FromSoft. And the track for Vort's fight does actually hint at this. The track sounds like a valiant war song, and the use of reverb and opera singers shows the player that the reason he is fighting you is for a reason greater than yourself. These mental links that are all subconscious, and to those players who experience the game without ever learning or even caring about the lore, can be completely missed, but it still adds so much to these fights. But what about the Firelink Shrine? Well, when first arriving at the shrine, you will discover that it's fallen into ruin and is barely standing still. I guess you could say that it's tired. The major theme of DS3 is this idea of exhaustion. We see it everywhere. The worlds, the NPCs, and even the Lords of Cinder. This idea was briefly mentioned in my video on Dark Souls 3, but I never really spoke about it too much. Mainly because the video was slightly rushed, but hey ho, we're just gonna ignore that. But if you want to specifically hear more about the world of Lothric being tired and slowly dying, then I'm going to refer you to this video by Jacob Geller that is linked in the description, so go and watch that after this video. Now, before I go on a completely different rant, where does Dark Souls 3 belong on the tier list? And well, I have to say that it does belong in S tier. I swear to God, I am not biased. I mean, just look at all these advanced physics equations that I used to determine where they should be ranked. Okay, moving on. Now it's time to go back to where all of these games started, and go back in time to 2009, as we are about to talk about Demon Souls. Now, before I actually wrote this video, I made a post in my community tab where I asked which one of the games has the best music. And although Demon Souls wasn't actually on the poll because I ran out of slots, it was a surprisingly popular choice. And I was actually pretty surprised by that, because Demon Souls' music is not something that gets talked about a lot. And I never really remembered Demon Souls' music being that good, but when I replayed it to get some footage, I realized just how great some of the tracks are. So let's talk about it. In the typical fashion of this video, let's talk about the hub music. And well, the Nexus's track with that absolutely orgasmic, reverberated organ gives the Nexus this unsettling feeling, which for the first time in a Souls game actually made me feel like this wasn't a place that I was safe. And I absolutely love that because it makes the game feel so refreshing when you're going through and playing all of them again just to rank them. But I do feel like a lot of the other tracks are actually just pretty mid, so the game's gonna go in B tier. However, do feel free to argue your side in the comments because I'm actually quite interested to see what you guys are saying. Well, that's enough of the past, because now it is time for my favorite time in these videos. It's Elden Ring time, baby! Elden Ring's music has become some of the most famous Souls music of all time, mainly because it fucking slaps. You know damn well that you have mastered how to make music for these games when even the main menu gets the player hyped up to play the game. And that's before they've even pressed a single button. The main menu music for Elden Ring was that good that any of the videos you see online talking about this game most likely features this track. And that is mainly because it fucking slaps. However, Elden Ring's music does actually break the mold a tiny bit because of that little thing that I mentioned about the earlier games. And that is the lack of music in the open areas. In Elden Ring, that was completely removed. And at first, I saw this as a bad thing, simply because I was thinking about it in the wrong way. I think that the usage of music in Elden Ring's open world makes the game 10 times better. Imagine wandering around this beautiful, expansive world, and instead of that peaceful melody, there's just nothing. Yeah, that'd be pretty boring. And then we have the boss music. The boss music in Elden Ring is absolutely insane. Whether it's the upbeat track that rages all throughout Margaret the Fellowman's fight, or the slow and peaceful track for Renala, Queen of the Full Moon's fight that still to this day sends chills down my spine and I still don't understand why. All in all, I think that Elden Ring's music is fantastic. But in comparison to the tracks from DS3 and DS1, I can't put it in S tier. But it is a solid 1000% assured A tier. Now, the final game on this list is actually one that I do intend to make a fully dedicated video just to simply talk about it, because it is some of the best music I have ever heard in anything, period. And I am, of course, talking about Bloodborne. Bloodborne is my favorite game of all time, and that is simply for two reasons. The first being the atmosphere, and the second one being how well the music and actual look of the game really embodies that atmosphere. The music in Bloodborne is some of the most twisted and spine-chilling pieces of music that I have ever had the pleasure of listening to. The music does really speak for itself, and because I want to make a dedicated video about this, I'm gonna keep this section very brief. The music matches the environment perfectly. The music enhances every single fight, and it really makes for some of the most memorable moments in gaming history. Bloodborne is going in S tier. And with that, that closes out the rankings. If you enjoyed this video, then you will 100% love my rankings of the Dark Souls difficulty, which is on screen now. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.